Let's go.
Boom. All right. So welcome, guys. Welcome to the Fuse Life podcast, episode number 66. And Fuse Life, we're all about God-given assignment, God-given purpose, where heaven meets earth in and through you. And my guest today is a great example of that. I am super excited to be talking with Darren Stott. Darren, I just want to welcome you. So good to have you with us, man.
Hey, man. What's up, Joseph? I've been looking forward to this, man.
Man, not as much as me, because I have been listening to your podcast.
No. Just as much. Probably more.
Well,
I've been looking forward to this, Joseph. Come on, man.
Well, I don't know if I should take you really seriously or not, but I was listening to your podcast, and I was listening to how you listen and how you communicate with your guests, and I love it because there are not many podcasts like that, you know. And I just want to honor you for taking a platform that many people don't take and then allowing conversation that many people don't want to have. And I just want to honor you for that and appreciate you being here with us, man.
Oh, thanks so much, man. It's been like I've been podcasting for years, but it was kind of like just a hobby kind of thing, like, you know, and kind of inconsistent too. And but it was just kind of fun, something just kind of on the side, you know. And I'd put whatever up, you know. I'd put like a 2-minute car conversation up, or like I might be like just playing the piano and record it and put that up, you know what I'm saying? And then I got like a prophetic word from Charlie Shamp and Patricia King about like media, and more specifically regarding the podcast. And I just knew I needed to actually begin to like steward it, you know. And I think sometimes it's kind of interesting, maybe this makes sense to you, but sometimes like we get doing so many things and we get so diversified, and then nothing's really all that fruitful. And sometimes I wonder if we think that that we should just diversify, do tons of stuff, and then whatever God puts his favor on, that's the thing we should go after. But then God never really puts his favor on anything, and so then we eventually are kind of just doing everything but doing nothing. And nothing's really being all that fruitful. And so for me, it was like God put his finger on this thing. It wasn't fruitful yet. Like, I was doing a podcast for a long time, man, and like I get like 30 people listening to like the audio, right? And then after they gave that word, that's when I started taking it really seriously, like an episode a week, you know. And then really wanted to go after this place of not doing interviews, but hosting conversations, and just talking about whatever was interesting to me, and then hoping it would be interesting to the guest. And so that's kind of what I've been doing. Similar to yourself. I mean, you got the same kind of heart and the same kind of gift and the same kind of thing with what you're doing. And I think it's really cool because, dude, like, we can do stuff. We can have conversations on podcasts where we're not preaching. We're not preaching at people. Like, when I say preaching, what I mean is like we're telling people what they should believe because it's like truth. But when we're doing a podcast, we're not like telling people what they should believe. We're just having a conversation, and like people can agree or people can disagree, but who cares? Because it's about what we're doing. And then it's like we get to honor people by including people in on a conversation that we might have anyway, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Come on. So guys, I mean, Darren's going to introduce himself properly. But he is a lead pastor at Seattle Revival Center. Pardon?
I said I apologize. I was like, we're off to the races.
We're gone, and that's great. And because I'm not like a big resume reader kind of thing, you know, at the intro. I like people to just share their story their way, you know, which I will get you to do very soon. But I want to just say some things that I've noticed, you know. Obviously, Darren has a heart for the miraculous, has a heart for the supernatural. His podcast is called The Supernaturalist, you know, and even in the intro, I love that he's calling out the ones that want to go after this. You know, it's not a sit down and let's just wait for 50 years to see if something happens. There is a moving here, you know, and the kingdom by nature is movement. It's a movement. And so I love that about him. And one of the reasons I'm really excited to have this conversation is because Darren has a vast variety of guests, you know, and just like with Fused Life, we're fusing everything that is kingdom, and people that have been really habituated with compartmentalization maybe don't understand how you could have these vast variety of guests, you know. And so to me, that shows your heart of seeing the whole picture of the kingdom, as opposed to grabbing one lane and not, like discounting everything else. And so I honor you, and I hope you can feel that.
Absolutely, Joseph. Absolutely.
Cool. Well, why don't you just tell some people about yourself? There's a whole bunch of people from New Zealand. They're like, who's this Darren guy,
What up, New Zealand? Woo, woo. Yeah, I'm in Seattle. Maybe you heard of Seattle, home of Pearl Jam, Nirvana, and Chop. I've been pastoring here for 11 years. My grandpa was a pastor at the church where I'm at. My dad was pastor. I swore I would never be a pastor. Ran away from the church. Ran away from Christians. I did not like Christians. I did not like pastors. Went through a bunch of brokenness and had some good reasons not to. And then the Lord restored me, and it's crazy. Like, I'm pastoring at the same church where my heart got broken. And so because of that, we have got a huge heart for restoration, and we are called Seattle Revival Center. That's the name of the church. And that's what we're going after. We're going after revival in Seattle, and our region and our coast and the nations. And there's, I got to just remember, like, Joseph, you got to keep me on point, because I'm super ADD, especially when once I get a couple cups of coffee. I mean, so yeah, pastor, podcaster, that's on YouTube and all the audio, iTunes, Spotify, all that good stuff. And then, pastor, husband, father. I got 4 kids. This year we'll be married 14 years.
Wow.
I'm 38. I wrote a book 4 years ago called Pattern Interrupt. That's pattern interrupt your dysfunctional patterns and stuff. And then I'm finishing up my second book right now, and it's on carving out a revival realm. And the idea is what we can do to prepare for, steward, and sustain a move of God on the earth. So that's what I'm wrapping up right now, and hopefully I'll be able to release that at the very beginning of 2021.
Awesome, man.
Yeah, man.
So many things we can go into here. I like to give our guests a bit of a backstory of people's journey and how they got to where they got. There's been so much of, hey, look at me, I'm doing all this stuff right now, but people can't see, well, how did you even get here? So could we go back a little bit? And it doesn't have to be much in detail, or as detailed as you want, but from, say, about 0 to 20 years old, like a little bit about your story. Or was Jesus in there? How was he in there? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so like raised in a pastor's home, I remember as a little kid, my dad telling me to come up on the stage, and he would like lift me up in front of the pulpit before I could even talk, and I'd be like, and I'd be like, preaching in the microphone. I have really good memories of that. My mom and dad were really, really good at including me in ministry as a child, and of course that was so just satisfying, because just being a kid, you would just want attention, and then you become an adult and you still just want attention. But just being a kid and having your dad like hold you up in front of the church and like you getting to do stuff, that was amazing. And I got memories of me as a little kid, even street preaching to my neighbors, right? The older I got, the less I did that, until finally when I came into my teens, and then my parents went through a divorce, they were Assembly of God ministers, and Assembly of God pastors don't get divorced. And I never thought my parents were perfect. They never once had a fight in front of me. Like, so it was like it, and I think that most Christian kids, I don't think that my story is unique, actually. I used to, but I think that most kids that grow up in the church have a moment where, as they're coming through adolescence, they get exposed. Like, it's like the blinders come off of their eyes, and they get to see people's humanity, and then how we deal with the people's humanity. When oftentimes when we're children, it's like we put everybody on pedestals and we idolize everybody. And then it's like when you start coming of age and you start to see the inconsistencies, and it's like, how do you process through hypocrisy. And also, what's interesting about that is that there's a temptation to become disillusioned by people's hypocrisy while ignoring our own. And for myself, what I did is I allowed other people's issues to justify me embracing my own fracturedness. And then so my fracturedness turned into bitterness. And because there's something that's beautiful about brokenness, but if you don't steward brokenness properly, then it can turn into bitterness. And what I mean by that is that, like, for a while I was going to the Lord with it, right? And I was trying to as a kid, I never had a desire to turn away from the Lord. I had too many encounters just growing up with God, so I could never turn away from God. But because of this brokenness, and then because of what I was seeing in people, that I just got really like, man, Christians are just they're so annoying or whatever else. Well, also because I'm a young man, I'm starting to come of age and stuff. I've got all this stuff happening inside of me. And then also I'm not really in community. Like, I'd grown up in a community, but because of what had happened with our church, my mom and I left our church. My dad moved out of the state altogether. And so I didn't have the accountability that's built into community anymore. So you can see how there's a lot of factors. And like I said, my case isn't isolated. I would imagine that there'd be loads of people that are watching right now or listening that would maybe have a similar experience. And to the degree that they've come out of that experience, like to the degree that they've been healed up or not, I think that my story can be really, really encouraging to people. Because I hear all the time, like, and I'm sure you have too, Joseph, like, man, there's just so much hypocrisy in the church. There's so much just stupid stuff that happens. And like, there's just so much lame, like the cult, like, and man, yeah, like I get it, right? Like I was totally there. But now, man, I can honestly say that I love the church, and I can honestly say that I love pastors, and that I love pastors' kids. I mean, I got 4 of them, and so I think the challenge is, and I think every single human is going to have to walk through this, but it's the forgiveness test, because forgiveness, it's like the crux of the gospel. It brings us back to the cross. It brings us back to the picture of our hanging Savior, who instead of damning the ones who are unjustly shaming and killing him, he intercedes for them, and he cries out to the Father, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." So I had chosen, like, I don't want to make myself out to be like this, like this amazing kind of guy. Like, oh no, just one day I just woke up and I was like, man, I forgive these jerks, right? Like, that wasn't my thing at all, man. Like, I did not want to forgive. I didn't feel like I had to forgive. Like, I was like phooey on forgiveness, except I didn't say phooey. And so the Lord set me up. What happened was, my pastor, so there was this gal that was in Australia doing like youth ministry, youth revival. She was saved under my grandpa's ministry. God called her back to start pastoring this church where I was a part of, Seattle Revival Center. And that was down to like nothing. It was down to like 12, 13 people. And she came back and she set up a meeting with me. I didn't even want to meet with her, but just out of respect, I met with her, and she was like, hey, and she just began apologizing, repenting for all this stuff that she didn't even do. She's just repenting and apologizing. And I was like, I don't get it. Like, you didn't do any of this stuff. And she was like, yeah, but somebody needs to apologize. Somebody needs to stand. She didn't say stand in the gap, but she was like, somebody needs to tell you that they're sorry. Somebody in leadership. So out of respect for her, I don't think I meant it, but I was like, I forgive you. And it was like God set me up, man, because like the power of words, right? Like, when we say something, even if we don't mean it, our words are so powerful. And so like I just said it just out of respect. I was like, all right, I forgive you, whatever. And without even realizing it, I had opened my heart back up. Like, forgiveness opens us up. And in the same way that bitterness opens us up, right? It just doesn't open us up to the Lord. It opens us up to the dark side, right? So like I was like, I forgive you, and I opened my heart up, and when I did, the Lord came in, and destiny came in. And I remember I still hadn't gone back to church yet. I was on a hunting trip, and I had this dream that I was back at the church and I was leading worship, and I was singing this song that I'd never sung before. And when I woke up from the dream, I was still singing this song. And it wasn't the song, it was like the anointing. It was like that feeling. It was like just took me back into all these incredible like glory encounters that like I was like, oh my gosh, right? Like it was like that place of hope deferred wasn't there. It was just hope. And I woke up into that. And then the second I stopped singing the song, it was gone. I couldn't remember what I was singing. And the Lord used that dream. So forgiveness brought about that opportunity for the Lord to come and to give me this dream. And then the Lord used the dream to put desire in my heart. For the very first time, I wanted to return back to the church that I said I would never go back to. And I'm very clear on that. I will never go back to that church. Gail will never be my pastor. And now I'm there and I'm pastoring. So that's not really a nutshell version, but there's a few places in there where I felt like we should go and explore a little bit. And
no problem. We just keep flowing. That's awesome. So was there a specific point in terms of becoming a leader, like actually pastoring the church where God did something? Did you have an encounter, anything like that? What made you be like, yeah, I'm going to take up this responsibility, you know?
Yeah, because I was doing business, like I was in sales, and life was going pretty good, and I was somewhat content. But I was also I'm back at church, right? And the Lord's restoring me, and believe it or not, I still hadn't really fully surrendered, if that makes sense. So it was like Jesus was my savior, but he wasn't really my Lord yet. I don't know if that'll resonate with people, but so because I was still doing my thing, even though I'm starting to come back and starting to re-engage and stuff. So then I went on a ministry trip to Indo with my dad, and we're talking in the early 2000s when Indonesia was in full-on revival. And we're also talking about a time when the Christian church there was under very intense Muslim persecution. So you've got strong radical Islamic persecution on the church, and then you've got revival, and churches are just exploding. And so we were there in Indo, and I was just completely blown away by these churches and these leaders, because it's so different than America, man. Like the church scene in America versus that revival glory church scene in Indo. I was so blown away. Wow. And these pastors were looking at me and they were like, so Darren, where are you pastoring? And I'm like, I'm not a pastor. And they'd be like, okay, so where are you pastoring? And I'd be like, no, I'm not a pastor. And they'd laugh and they'd be like, yep, you're a pastor. And that happened like over and over and over again. And by this point in time, I think I kind of knew, but I was just like, whatever. Nope, not doing it. And then this is pretty cool. So the final church that we went to in Indo, there's like this crazy, awesome Papa general guy, right? And we go to his church. We did just his home groups, right? And there was over 500 leaders there. That was just his home group leaders, right?
Wow.
And after the meeting, we went out to Pizza Hut in Jakarta with my dad and I and his whole family, his kids. And like his kids just respected him so much. I'm like, this is amazing. Here you have a pastor, and his pastor's kids like adore him. In his office, he had pictures of him with like the Bush family, like George Bush Sr. He had a picture of him with Nelson Mandela. Like he was a radical in that, like he was a Christian, and he would run for political offices in Indonesia, which can get you killed, right? And so I was like, man, this guy is just amazing. So we're at Pizza Hut, and like he asked if he could pray for me when we're done with our meal. He's directly across from the table from me. I was like, yeah, sure. He stands up and he puts his hands on my head and he just starts speaking in tongues. And then he starts to prophesy about who my grandpa was, his destiny, my dad, his destiny, me, and my inheritance. And then he starts addressing all of my fears. I had a lot of fears regarding family, about marriage. I wasn't dating anyone, nothing like that. And then so I'm like weeping. I'm just weeping. And then he's like, next time you come back to Indonesia, you're gonna come without your dad. And when you come, you can call me Papa. And so I fly home. I'm weeping on the airplane. I'm like, okay, I say yes to you, Lord. I get home. I meet with my pastor. This is crazy, but I've been called to be a pastor. And she goes, yep, I know. The elders know. We've been waiting for you to hear from God.
Wow.
I got him on a gag order because if I said anything to you, I know that you'd pull a Jonah. You just like take off running. So we've been waiting for you to hear from God. And then that began a 5-year mentoring thing, Bible school, the whole thing. I was still working, working in sales and doing the church thing. And then in 2000, and then all of a sudden, like once I said yes to the Lord in that ministry capacity, that's like when he became my Lord. Like that's when I was like, I surrender, I submit everything. And that's when, for me, the Lord started ordering my steps, because up to that point, I was still ordering my own steps. Once I said yes to his lordship, we know that the scripture that that the steps of the righteous are ordered of the Lord. Once I submitted this to him, he began ordering my steps. And literally, like my wife, who has never interested me in the past, before that point, all of a sudden was interested in me. It was a heck of a courtship. I had to seriously pursue her, but she married me. Hallelujah. She was amazing. And then I just want to skip a beat and then go to 2016. My dad passes away. He's on a trip from Jakarta to the Ukraine. He has a heart attack on the airplane. I hadn't been back to Indo since I was called into ministry. I get my entire family and we go to Indonesia to get his stuff. It was like a second home for him. And we go there and we meet up with the pastor that had prophesied over me. And like the prophetic word that he had given me, right, completely fulfilled, about pastoring, about my family, like everything that he had prophesied, like fulfilled, all the way down to the detail of returning back to Indonesia without my dad, meeting with him. And I was like, so we met in a restaurant, right? Like I bring my family, we meet him in a restaurant, just like the very first time he blessed me. He puts his hands on my head. He prays for our family. I'm there with 4 kids now, my wife, and that was so absolutely amazing. That is that's the faithfulness of God. That all of his promises are yes and amen. So so that's kind of the part B as far as coming into ministry and pastoring. And like I said, 11 years as of Easter, and we're having a lot of fun.
Yeah. Wow. This man in Indonesia sounds like he's a real father, even the fact that he would want to connect with you like that. How important do you think it is to have men and women like this who would lay their hands on and actually speak something that could change the course of your life, How important do you think that is? And do you think that's common? Does it need to become more common?
It's not common, man. I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, but the whole fathering thing I'd say in the US is a very kind of a foreign concept, or it's forced and it's weird. I've had a lot of guys try to father me, and I didn't really want them to father me. I was like, yeah, you're you and I'm me. We got different values, and it just felt really forced and strange. And but for Pastor Ginting, and there in I think it's actually in Summering, he is a father. So because he's a spiritual father, he doesn't force. He doesn't have to force it. It's who he is. So it's what he does, and he doesn't really care if you embrace it or reject it. And he really opened up, and his son really opened up, because the Westernism of America is hitting Indonesia hard. So a lot of the Eastern values for family and loyalty are disappearing out of their culture, and it's really hard on him, because like the people in his church are his children, and he led them to the Lord, he's discipled them, and he's brought them into leadership, and I mean, and that's rare in America. That's super rare in America, in a culture where just somebody getting saved is kind of rare in America. Let alone being discipled and brought up through sonship and into leadership. And so I found that really, really interesting. That this Westernism is coming into the East, and now you've got these churches that that look just like America, that are very professional, but there's really not a lot of glory on it, and it's very kind of performance centric. And then what he was saying is that it's almost like the church with the best performance is so you've got these what's happening now is you've got these people that he's mentoring and loving and getting saved, but then they leave his church to go to another church because it's more American, it's more hip, and that for him is heartbreaking, because it's not, he doesn't care about somebody else's church getting larger. He cares about this relationship that he had that's no longer there, because these people have this thought that if I go to this church, then we don't need to be connected anymore. And so you could say in America, we're more kingdom. So like I'm very comfortable with people leaving my church to go to another church just down the street, and we will bless you, we will send you, and we will release you. Like really, so we're very kingdom at Seattle Bible Center. We don't feel a strong sense of like ownership to have to like control our people. And yet what we don't have in America is what they have in the East, which is a fierce commitment to the people, that you're not just a congregant, you're a son, you're a daughter.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure some of this out. I just
wanted to say something just in terms of that. I have a friend from Texas, and he says something that I love. He says the kingdom is familial in nature, governmental in structure. And I always see it's familial in nature, and governmental in structure, you know. And I think there are places that have the governmental structure, but they're not sitting on the family nature, and they cause so much pain, you know. And then there are some places that have the family nature, but they don't have the governmental structure, so they have no authority in their region. And I thought he summed it up really well, you know.
Yeah, man, because it's on one hand, it's easier to be governmental, because then my heart doesn't really have to be connected with your heart.
Yeah.
We'll set up, it'll be structure based and outcome based, so that we can define the win by an excellent outcome. But if something doesn't work out between you and me and you got to go, great, because I've guarded my heart. I didn't really have to really love you and really know you. And the unfortunate part about that is that if that is the case, you're going to know that you're doing life with me, but that I don't really love you.
Yeah.
That I'm not really connected with you. So you're always going to feel more of like a kingdom employee than you're going to feel like a true brother, man. And so like, I'm being healed up a lot, man, just because of my own kind of trust issues and my own kind of self-preservation. Like here's how I'm going to survive pastoral ministry. Seeing how my parents were just continually like thrashed by people, right? So like I think I went into this thing saying like I am not going to be thrashed by people. I'm really going to protect myself. But then the problem is I got a young man in the church, and he called me Papa the other day by accident. And then I was like, this young guy, he's from another culture, right? Like this young guy's looking at me like his spiritual father, and I don't know if I want to be that to him. I want to be more like a brother. I don't know if I've got that bandwidth. I don't know if I don't, you know. And it kind of, and so yeah, man. So the Lord's having to teach me. I'll tell you about a quick encounter really quick, and then we can do whatever you want to do. But I had this encounter last year where I was taken back to an incident like with our family. We were driving in the car, and there was like some drama in the car, and my mom was kind of dealing with the drama, and my dad was driving. And I was the little kid, and I was kind of provoking the drama between my sister and I. And so the Lord took me into this scene, and I'm like, why am I here? What's going on with this? And the Lord was like, what was your dad doing? And I was like, He was just driving. He really wasn't using his leadership as a father to bring some shalom to the car. My mom was having to do that. And then all of a sudden it was, I looked and I was the one driving, and now I was the dad in the car. And it's like, and like the Lord was showing me, like, you are a father now. And yeah. And
Yeah.
it's not about just your responsibility to keep the car on the road. It's not about just your responsibility to keep the church on the road. It's your responsibility that your heart would be engaging the people that are in the car, and that you would use your leadership and who you are as a father to bring peace. And so that was pretty incredible, because I think the Lord used that for me to be like, yeah, in one hand, I need to kind of grow up, and just to be willing to be open to this idea of being a father, not just a brother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, come on. I'm so excited for you because I see you fathering a generation. And that was really interesting. I went through a crazy journey probably 4 years ago. And after it all, this chaos, I wanted to run away and had some encounters that kind of kept me. And I ended up in California, and I got a chance to have breakfast with an amazing man. And he said this thing. He said, we're going to see a generation of men who have never had fathers, but are going to be fathers. And I feel like there was this gap, maybe I would say, between the 35 and 60-year-olds that didn't know how to respond to the younger generation. But now I believe there are people such as yourself, and we're going to step into a place where we will know how to father while being fathered, and the tri-dimensional relationships. Like when I see Bobby Connor and I see some of how he talks, and I really love that he grabbed Jeremy Nelson and is just like, hey, God says you're going to be one of my sons. And so he's willing to do what that means, and so I see that on you, man. I'm so I feel like there'll be a shift, and even in your ministry now and what's about to happen because of relationship. I'm so excited for you.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, thanks, Joseph.
So in 2016 you won an award. Can you tell us about that? What's up with this award, and why did you get it?
Yeah, so and that's a big thing too. I'll just kind of stay focused, and then we can go deeper wherever you want to go deeper. But
Sure.
When I went through a season, I guess you could say, where I was it was a very long season where I was very, very involved in our city here, and also in our neighboring city, and so I was able to. I was actually being sought out locally here in my city to get advice on different things, and even invited at one point to join a commission in my local city here that I live in, and was also on the board of a team in a neighboring city, and then became the chairman of the board in a neighboring city. So I was very involved in that time, and then in 2016, the Chamber of Commerce for the city of Newcastle did an event. And I was given the Dennis Jarnell man of influence, or whatever, what influencer person in the city for that year. And so that was cool. It was cool to be recognized by the chamber, by the business community. That was a real honor.
Like, what were you doing when you say you get on the board and stuff? Like, what are they coming to you for? Was this like a Christian role in that sense, or was it just?
No, and so actually, so for years I tried to penetrate our local government here within Newcastle, but I couldn't. It was just really strange, and didn't really want a pastor involved. And then I was sought out by a board in a neighboring city because of our involvement. We were a sponsor of a large event within the city, and so because of our role with sponsoring, and they saw that I was a young guy at the time, and they didn't have any young people on their board. And so they asked if I would just come in and just attend their meetings, their board meetings. for this large event. And you're talking like, up to 100,000 people going through a park over 3 days, 1,000 volunteers, like pretty amazing.
Wow.
All volunteer run, all paid for by private sponsorship. So you're talking about a year's worth of planning to pull off one event. And so that was amazing because I'd never been a part of anything of that scope before. But they were apprehensive. I think I never heard this from them, but I think they had kind of a cool thing. They had great chemistry on their board. And because I was the only person that they ever made attend meetings for 3 months before they made an official board member. So like, I don't know for sure. These guys are awesome, but I think they're like, this guy's a pastor. Like, yeah, is he weird? Is he going to ruin our chemistry? What's he going to bring? And so, yeah, I attended meetings for 3 months, and then they were like, all right, if we like you, if you like us, you can join. And like I said, I was on that thing for, I think, 8 years. And so because of that relationship, my local city, they would start to see me in Renton. And then they were struggling with their own city event, really, really struggling. And so they sought me out to start getting advice and guidance on our local kind of city event, which almost had to shut down. And so that's when I was continually kind of like trying to knock on a door that wouldn't really open. And now they were knocking on my door. And so that's how that relationship took place. And man, it was so amazing because that first time at the boardroom table at City Hall, the top of the building, incredible views. I'd never been in that kind of environment before. I'd never been at that kind of table with all these city leaders. And I felt so awkward. And so I remember Solomon says that a wise man is quiet, right? So I was like, and a fool is always talking. So I was like, I'm going to look like I'm wise and I'm not going to talk. And Lord, you tell me what to say. So like, maybe that's why they made me hang out for 3 months. Cause I would hardly say anything. I was just sitting there watching, learning, listening. And I felt so awkward. I felt so weird, but I can tell you, man, like before I resigned, like, so being the chairman of the board there for 2 years, I had to do some really difficult things, including confronting city council, including having some fierce conversations with the mayor and his right hand. And I can tell you this, there was no awkwardness. There was no fear. There was a ton of boldness because of just the opportunity to be in that atmosphere. And so I'm always looking for that next thing where it feels awkward, where I feel clunky, where I feel like this is beyond me. And because that's where you just get conditioned. Like, so because of that whole thing, man, like I have a real grace where I can pretty much interface pretty much anyone in our city, or like, and there's not that intimidation factor and all that. Yeah. So the Lord really used that just to grow me,
Wow. Amazing. I mean, there's so many subjects we can go into here. So if there's any particular one, you go for it. So there seems to be like this pattern interrupt. I mean, I guess that's why you write this book, right? Like you're happy to interrupt. And so what are your thoughts on that? And do you think that the kingdom consists of a lot of interruptions when it comes to manifesting in this world? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I'll tell you about the book. So I believe that you only have that your authority is determined by your own testimony, right? And so so if you don't know where your authority is, look at your own testimony, look at the victories within your life, and you're going to find your authority keys. You're going to find this. So people that are always looking for a future revelation and thinking that future revelation is going to become a platform for their ministry, they're always going to be looking, and they're never going to get started with ministry. You can't look to the future to start your ministry. You have to look to your past. You have to look at where your victories are at. The problem is, for many believers, is that they don't honor their victories. They think that a testimony has an expiration date. They think that if people have heard this 1,000 times, that it doesn't have power anymore. But we know that we overcome the enemy with the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And so like, I get annoyed when people are like, yeah, he shared that testimony again, but that was from 1987. Like, no. Like that testimony that was an act of God, so therefore it still has juice on it. Like that's like, and I'm getting a little fired up for no apparent reason, but that's like the cross. Like Jesus died on a cross, and for people like, yeah, but that already happened. Like that's a past event. Like, can we move on? No, we can't move on, because if God does something, it's not a past event. It's got juice on it in the past, the present, and the future. So your testimony, like the testimony of Jesus, everything that Jesus did still has juice on it. Like, and that means that whatever God has done in your life in the past, that we've got to remember that. We can't forsake it. We've got to steward that. There's still life on it. And here's the other thing. I know that there's like 10 million Darrens that they were at, like they are right now where I once was. And therefore, my victory story, like that's where I have authority, that I can help out 10 million other disgruntled pastors' kids that are done with the church, that are done with Christians, that are done with the whole thing, yet there's a call of God on their life and there's inheritance on their life. And you know what I'm saying? So the reason why I'm preaching right now is because I wanted to write a book, Pattern Interrupt. I wanted to write a book in areas where I had or where I have authority. And so therefore it's going to have to be my own story. And so, so I, like, my whole thing is I wanted to deal with fear, shame, and control. And so those are the three things that I go after in my book. And it's like my testimony. When you're reading the book, you're hearing all these breakthroughs and stuff within my own life. And yet I know testimony books are usually pretty boring, because, you know, it's like, well, that's great that God did that for you, but all right, so what's in this for me? You know what I'm saying? And so that's where it's kind of a testimony book. And yet like I'll break out and be like, okay, let's talk about pornography and lust. Like it'll break out. How do you interrupt that pattern? All right, now let's go back to my story. Okay, enough about that. Let's go back to my story. Oh, yeah. All right, whoa. Let's talk about pattern interrupt for stress. The kind of stress that's going to defeat you. Okay, now enough about that. Let's get back to my story. Let's talk about me. You know, and I'll be going. And then also, I love story. I love to tell stories. So I'm telling just crazy stories in order to set things up in such a way where people have like an imaginative realm where they can now cut through something in their own life. So that's totally pattern interrupt. It's the most ADD book that you've ever read. It's all over the map. I wanted to write a book for dudes that don't like to read. I wanted to write a book where you could open it right in the very middle of the book and just read a couple of paragraphs, have a good laugh, and maybe get like a breakthrough. And so, and it was my first book. And so that's pattern interrupt. It's this place of like, being able to identify these things that are most likely fear-based, right? Most of our issues are either fear-based or shame-based. And then because of these things, we insert our own control. And at that point, we set autopilot up within our life because we think that predictability means safety. And so we think that if I know exactly what's going to happen on Monday, if I know exactly what's going to happen on Tuesday, subconsciously, that's safety. And yet, the way that God created us, there's a part of our soul that's hungry for spontaneity. And that's when we get ourselves into trouble, because all of a sudden we begin violating our own values because we're looking for more. We're looking for that thing that God has called us to drop everything and to follow him. That's pretty spontaneous. Quit your job, quit your life, quit your dreams, and follow me. Like that's pretty bold. Like there's a part of us that God has created us just to follow him. And yet for a lot of us, we set up these survival mechanisms, and so that we have all this predictability, and then our souls are longing for spontaneity, and so we develop a lifestyle where we think we're in control, and yet we're not, and these other things begin controlling us. And it's the same story if you're in the church or out of the church. I mean, I'm a pastor, and I've crazy conversations, and they never surprise me. Like we are humans, you know. Yeah. And there's this fracturedness that continually tries to pop up, and so that's pattern interrupt. It's this place of like, all right, It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. He who the Son sets free is free indeed, unquestionably free. Your storyline, you are already restored. The end of your storyline is the restoration of all things, right?
Yeah.
And so that builds a lot of faith. And so let's just do it. Let's interrupt these dysfunctional patterns. Let's get off of cruise control and let's start going after the things of God, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, come on. I'm just trying to see because there's so many things that we could go to, and maybe we do another episode, Darren, if you're free. That would be amazing.
Yeah, we can do lots of stuff, man.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Virtual Zoom walks through a park,
Come on. I want to talk about your city. I want to talk about because you seem to have a heart for the region and an understanding of regional impact, I guess, the kingdom impact. And then you were with Charlie at the Chop, like many New Zealanders probably don't even know what that is. And I think it was Chaz first and then Chop. Can you break that down a little bit? And then why did you go in there and what happened there? Just quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So after the George Floyd incident, which was a black man that was essentially murdered by the police. Now that's controversial. That's even a controversial statement, but that is the dominant narrative within our country, is that you have a black man that was treated unjustly, pressure to his neck, and it was like in a year where injustice has been fairly common towards people of color in this year. And then you've got COVID-19. So we're all isolated. We're all in quarantine. We're all at home. We're all frustrated. And then on top of that, you do this. And it's like, man, our country just popped with rage. Like enough already. And you've got organizations that have been waiting for this. You've got organizations in our country that have been waiting for chaos so they can exploit the chaos. You've got like this perfect storm. You've got COVID, you've got these acts of injustice, and then you've got George Floyd. And at that moment, we began to see like protests and organized protests and peaceful protests for the most part all across the country. You got people that are saying like, enough already. But then that begins to kind of transform a little bit into this defund the police movement. So we went from saying somebody's got to do something about unjust policing. Like somebody's got to do something there. It's not that all police are bad, but there is a segment of police, and who's going to hold them accountable, and how does this get corrected? So you go from that, which I'm all about that, right? Like we all should be as believers. Like you got a few bad apples, let's deal with it, right? Let's deal with that because, all right. But it went from that to all police are bad apples. The idea of policing originates from racism, and that any sort of enforcing the law is rooted somehow, is tethered somehow to systemic racism. Therefore, the way we fix this whole thing is to abolish the whole thing, is to essentially destroy the whole thing. I saw a symbol somebody put on Instagram. It was an anarchy symbol that then turned around into a peace symbol. And that is a classic Marxist like propaganda for an uprising, for the demolition, destruction. Let's tear this thing down and then rebuild what we want to do. So that these peaceful protests started getting violent, and they started going. We saw our cities getting destroyed, Seattle getting just messed up, Bellevue getting messed up. Other cities these are no longer peaceful protesters. These are organized groups, many of which are being paid even by the local mafia to loot and to steal purses, high-end things, for exploiting all of these factors, exploiting injustice, exploiting COVID-19, all of these factors to create a perfect storm. All right, now you've got a protest that's been declared to come into Capitol Hill, and you've got our mayor in Seattle looking at what her choices are. And she develops this thesis that if there's no resistance, there can be no war. So in an effort to extend an olive branch to this group that's coming in to bring anarchy and to destroy everything, to extend an olive branch to them, she orders the police to leave the police station there on Capitol Hill. And so the police completely abandon the police station. The door to the police station is left open for them. And you've got this group that comes in, and there's no police officers anywhere in that whole area. So guess what? Now they see themselves as the new law. In fact, they see themselves as their own country, and they begin setting up barriers and blockades. They begin building walls, and they begin putting up large signs that say, now leaving the United States of America, you are now entering Chaz, which stands for the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. This is the area without law. This is where we do whatever we want. And so the mayor, when interviewed by the press, was laughing about this. She thought it was great. And she says, I think that in Seattle, we're going to have a summer of love. And what happened is that there was local businesses being broken into and taken over by protesters, people's homes being broken into. And so it's that context that Charlie Shamp calls me up and is like, hey, let's go into Chaz. Well, the Lord actually spoke to me, and he started speaking to me about this word: we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and crazy, creepy things in cosmic places. And I'm thinking the word wrestle caught my attention. And so I was like, man, when Paul's talking about wrestle, like I think of like WWE or like, MMA or something. Like what would that have meant to the first century church? So I looked up that word wrestle, and it talks about two opponents that go after each other, and that win this sport by applying pressure to the other's neck.
Yeah, and you see pictures of that where you're head to head, and they got their hand behind on the neck, gripping for control. Yeah.
And that's how this whole thing started, was applying pressure, fatal pressure to the back of George Floyd's neck. And the Lord said, there's an attack. Wow. There's an attack against the head, but it's coming against the neck. And the Lord spoke to me and said that the enemy is going to try to remove the head from the body, talking about the church, to remove Christ from the church, to remove Christ from Jesus, to remove the anointing from Jesus. And I didn't even realize it, but Capitol Hill, so Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, capital means head, right? Wow. And so they're going to try to chop off the head from the body. The weekend that the Lord gave me that word, I brought that word to Seattle Revival Center. That weekend, there at Chaz, they said, this thing's turning too much into a party. And this is not supposed to be a party. It's supposed to be an organized protest. So they changed the name to Capitol Hill Organized Protest, or CHOP. It changed as to CHOP. So you've got CHOP on Head Hill, or Capitol Hill. Capital means head. And I just thought that was fascinating. So anyway, Charlie said, hey, I want to come. I want to bring a team. I said, great. Charlie lands with the team on a Sunday night. And so we just decided to go and check it out on Sunday night. And we went into CHOP about 10:30 at night without any idea of what we were getting ourselves into. We had one guy go with us from our church, David Kusick, who had actually been doing a lot of ministry there. So because David was with us, we really weren't afraid. But some people interpret that as bravery. Like a pastor just said to me, you guys were so brave. Well, we had David with us, and he had been doing ministry. So we really weren't brave. We were kind of naive, I guess. Charlie's just a faith guy. Like you could take Charlie. Like Charlie's just faith, right? But I think for myself, I was just kind of naive. So we go up, dude, you've got like seven white guys walking up this hill, and we look like cops, man. We look like undercover cops, and we're rolling up into CHOP, and they've got cameras on us, and they send this girl out to us, and she runs up. She's like, "Are you guys cops?" She's kind of like, we're like, no, we're not cops. She's like, "Well, then what are you doing here?" And we're like, we're just here. These guys are all from out of town, and we're just checking out the scene, checking out what's going on. And she goes, things are crazy around here. She said, the cops are going to be coming in. She's like, I don't care. I'm willing to fight for this. I'm willing to die for this. She said, we got women that are being abducted every night and raped. We got people that are being stabbed out here. So if you guys see anything, please report it, to the tent over here. And that's the thing. Like I said that on my own Facebook. Like women are getting raped. People are getting mugged. People are getting stabbed. We heard that firsthand from people there in CHOP. And this dude, this punk, called me out on Facebook. He's like, "What are you talking about? People aren't getting raped. People aren't getting it." And he's not even part of that scene. He's some. Anyways, he's a church kid that thinks he knows what's up, and he's like, "You don't even know what you're talking about." Listen, we were there for 4 nights. We had so many conversations with people that were actually living there. And she told us women are getting raped. We heard that multiple times. We met one guy. He's a Christian. The Lord called him there just to protect people.
Wow.
So if he saw things getting out of hand, he would go up and he would just start talking people out of it. And he told us that he had saved multiple women from being raped.
Wow.
So this is the whole this is the side of CHOP and Chaz that the media didn't know anything. They weren't even allowed into CHOP. Like if you had big cameras, they would make a crowd around you and they would force you out. So that very first night, man, I see this young guy, this young black kid sitting on this thing. And my heart just kind of went out for him. I knew I was supposed to talk to him. So I just went up and I was like, "Hey man, what's up?" And he's like, "You guys cops?" We're like, "No, we're not cops." And he's like, "So," I was like, "So what are you doing here? What's this all about?" And then he begins to open up. He begins to talk and talk and talk. And the Lord starts to tell me about this guy. So then finally I interrupted him. I'm like, "Hey dude, I don't know if this makes sense," but I just began to talk to him and begin to kind of read his mail. The Lord just starts to tell me all about him. And he's like, "Bro, how do you know all that?" Like he starts tripping out. He's like, "How do you know this all about me?" And I just continue because I don't want to be like, "We're Christians" or "We're pastors."
Yeah.
And he discerns what's going on. He puts out his hands like this. He says, "Pray for me." And so I was like, "Come on, guys." So I prayed first, and then all the rest of the guys started praying. We all started getting words for the guy. Well, man, we found out the next day that was the head of CHOP. He's this young guy that they put in charge. In fact, if listeners go and look at just pictures of the media of the CHOP bust, if you look at just look at CHOP or Chaz, you're going to see pictures of this young guy. His name was Rio, with these dreadlocks. Sometimes you'll see him with a bulletproof vest on. Sometimes you'll see him on top of people's cars, beating people's cars. That was the head of CHOP in the last week of it. And the very first night, the very first guy we ministered to, that was the head. Again, going back to the headship. And what happened was because we had his blessing, when things would get crazy or people would start accusing us of stuff, we would name drop him. And at one time, he actually showed up and spoke up for Charlie, because these guys were starting to intimidate. These guys were about to kick Charlie and Alex out of the park. And Rio shows up. He's like, "I know these guys. These are Jesus people. They're totally cool." Wow. So that's just one. We could go on. That's an episode. I mean, I got something on my podcast where you can listen to all of our testimonies from that.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I listened to that one. Pretty crazy. Pretty crazy. So obviously revival is something that's big on your heart, and I guess you're going even into places like that with revival. Can you share with us some of your early stories of maybe some of your missions, some of your trips to Indonesia, but where you started to see revival, and maybe a story that, an encounter that marked you?
Yeah, absolutely. My earliest exposure to revival was my dad was burnout. This is 94. He was going to quit the ministry. He goes to Toronto. He has an encounter, and the encounter leaves him drunk in the spirit, to the point where he can't function, where he can't talk. And from that point on, he went into a lifestyle of drunkenness in the spirit. And that was a trip for me, because my dad was a very dignified, proper Assembly of God minister, British, but like my dad was English. And so now seeing my dad flipping out of a chair, laughing hysterically, and not being able to preach, like that was like, my dad would usually, his ministry would compose of him just drunk out of his mind, and then he'd shift and go into like hardcore prophesying, like just prophesying, and then he'd come out of it and the whole room would just. So that was how I was raised. My dad was a mystic. He never would have called himself that. That wasn't a term that was being used. But oftentimes he would be driving and he'd have to pull over, because the lightnings of God would be out on the freeway, on the road. He'd be actually watching the lightnings, and then he wouldn't be able to function. He wouldn't be able to talk or even drive, so he'd have to pull over. There were times that he would have to have people pick him up because he could no longer drive. He was no longer safe to drive. He actually wrote a book called Drinking and Driving.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was kind of raised, in that whole kind of glory kind of realm. Like that was the glory of God and his engagement with the angelic. And so that's what I've loved. I've always had a desire for the mystic realm, even for mystics, and that's where you see that on my podcast. That's where you see that diversity, is because you'll see more traditional Pentecostal type ministers, but then you'll also see these other ministers that are just, where it's almost more about what's happening at home in their secret place than it is even what's happening in the meetings,
Yeah.
And so for me, the way I define revival is, I define revival as when we step through the wardrobe into Narnia. I believe that that revival isn't the end. It's just the portal. It's the place of crossing over. And I believe that the portal is always open. I believe that the veil of separation has been removed, right? And that we are in union with him. And so so that's how I define revival. And when I see a revival dynamic in a church, it's because the whole church steps through the wardrobe.
Yeah.
We come into another realm. We experience it together. And you might see some people weeping hysterically. You might see other people laughing. You might see some people going through deliverance. That there's no, in these environments, they look very chaotic, because the whole room just shifted into a new place. And now everybody is responding to the awareness of heaven and the glory. And so that's my own definition of revival, because it's a tricky word. In the 90s, it would get you. It wasn't hip. It would get you protesters at your church. Most people thought my dad was demon possessed, but now revival's pretty hip. Like there's almost this thing of like revival culture, which is more like a worship scene, which is glorious, which is awesome. But now it's like, if you say you're a revival church, people are pretty down with it, even in churches where that they're not big on Holy Spirit or speaking in tongues and stuff. So revival's pretty happening. And yet I define it this way, because for me it's the picture of historically, when you see like the Welsh revival, you see an entire country that goes through the wardrobe, and you see an entire country impacted in 3 years, where you almost have the Christianization of a nation. People would describe crossing over into Wales and feeling the manifest presence of the Lord like an electric current coming out of the soil. Why? Because the country's has crossed over. So that's how I define it. And I love to see people that have never cross over. And bro, also, we need to see people that went to Narnia 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but haven't been back. And there's a lot of hope deferred there. And they think like, been there, done that, I'm done with that. We need to get them back to the Narnia. You know what I'm saying? We're like, we've got to get back, because there's some people that have moved on and they're like, I'm done with the portal. And now they're living in their head. And honestly, they think they're engaging the future, but they're really not. We're living from our heads, and we're trying to rationalize and use our own logic and do all of this stuff. But most of it has no fruit, like very little fruit. And if we do have fruit, it's very predictable. It's like 1 + 1 = 2. But in the kingdom, 1 + 1 = 1,000,000. Like when you cross over, it's like you do very little and a lot gets accomplished because of the efficiency and the glory, right?
Yeah. Wow. Can you recount any encounter or story that really gripped you in the last 15 years?
Well, yeah, I'll just go back to like 2016. So we hosted a 3-day conference with Bobby Connor and Patricia King and Leif Hetland and Charlie Shamp. And it was supposed to be 3 days, but we felt the acceleration. We felt the wave before we even started. We felt the portal opening. And we just knew that there was an invitation. Again, bro, man, I can feel the presence on this, but you get these moments, man, where you just feel the invitation from the Lord, and you just know that you can catch the wave if you want to. Hey, here's the wave, and the Lord's like, you can catch this one, or you can let it pass you by, you know. And we felt that, and we were like, we're gonna ride it. Like we started preparing. We started getting our whole team ready. Which expectation and preparation, those are two major keys to preparing for and stewarding a move of God. We began preparing, and we were supposed to do a 3-day conference, and it turned into 7 weeks of going almost every night. We would take Monday nights off.
Wow.
And what happened was, from the outside, externally, it looked like these guys are just doing a lot of meetings. But dude, I was transformed. And even though I say 7 weeks, we actually went 2 years of doing meetings every weekend. And it wasn't just meetings. There is a supernatural fruitfulness and efficiency. It's the only way I can describe it is like Obed-Edom, right? He let God move into his house. And when he did, his wife and daughters began having children every 2 weeks. That's what Jewish scholars tell us, that when Obed-Edom was blessed, we all read that. We know like crazy blessed, because there was so many rumors going out that David is like, okay, I changed my mind. I want God living in my city. David was freaked out, right? Because of Uzzah, is that his name? That got
that died, yeah,
because he touched the glory, you know.
Yeah.
But Obed-Edom and David, I don't think he had much of a choice. Like David knocked on his door and like, hey, so I got God with me, and he's gonna live in your house. You know, and he let him come in, and he was blessed. But scholars tell us that every 2 weeks, his wife and daughters were having children, and not just children, but like we're talking like multiple children. So we see accelerated fruitfulness.
Wow.
And I'm telling you, if you look at church history, whenever you see what I'll just refer to as a revival dynamic, whenever you see a people cross over and they lay down their agenda and they pick up the agenda of heaven, you will see supernatural multiplication in every way possible. You will see it like if you've got kids and they're little musicians and they get to be on the worship team in that glory atmosphere, their talent, their gift, it will go crazy in that atmosphere. If you've got evangelists in your church and they've always wanted to get people saved, in that glory, in that place, they are going to just start seeing tons of people get saved. Anybody with any sort of little prophetic kind of leaning, their prophetic anointing is going to just go through the roof. They're going to get so radically sharp. And so that's what we saw in 2016. That's what we saw in the 90s. That's what we saw whenever we saw a move of God in Ireland. A revival broke out in Ireland. It became known as Fireland. It was almost like a worship revival where these drummers would just take off, and the meeting would get hijacked. This is in Northern Ireland. in Ballyclare, and you had what was called the Drummers of Ballyclare. And this was an extension of meetings that would go night after night after night, in a time when there was a lot of tension in Northern Ireland and the troubles there. That's the other thing. Sorry, I'm just talking.
We're good. You're good, man. Go for it.
Whenever you see chaos and calamity, whenever you see radical adversity in a nation, you always see the atmosphere for revival. You always see a hotbed. You always see a place of, because the Lord loves to show up in the chaos. So even in Indonesia, back in the early 2000s, when revival broke out there, is in the context of the Muslim persecution against the church. We were in Australia, revival broke out there. Our family moved there for a year in Australia. So we've seen a lot of moves of God, and we've seen that correlation when God moves in, when we are being like, okay, everything else is on hold. Why? Because God is here. This is really terrifying. He's here. You see that place of blessing begin to break out.
Man, so what are your thoughts on when so many people come, they encounter God? Like, I got saved in a church that was like that, like revival every weekend. It was crazy. It did accelerate me. It shifted my whole life, like radically, like really radically. So many stories. But what do you think of they come to God? People come to God. But what are your thoughts on discipleship? What happens to the majority? There's going to be some people that will grab it and run. But what do you think of that and the Reformation that then should spill out into the nation? What are your thoughts on some of that?
Okay, so that's an awesome question. That's where we can kind of geek out a little bit. So to the church, it has been given the office of the apostle, the prophet, the pastor, the teacher, and the evangelist. So when revival shifts into awakening, which is the difference between a 2 to 5 year move versus a 30-year move, what you see is the difference between that is one finger in operation, one token office or gifting in operation effectively over a 2 to 5 year moment, versus all 5 offices being employed together to host something in a region or a nation. When you've got 5 offices partnering together, what you have is you've got accountability. You've got something that can begin to reform supernaturally. Because I don't believe in reformation outside of the presence, because I think that what that becomes is cultural manipulation that involves using our own logic with good intention to try to do something that God has in his heart, but we're keeping him out of the equation because we want to keep it clean or respectable according to our own kind of definition. So I'm not about that. I believe that we shouldn't seek reformation. We should seek revival, and true revival within the context of where it's accountable will lead to reformation. In fact, reformation historically, usually for the church has to do with, theological reformation. You see the reformers, and it has to do with the church. So when you hear the word in the past in church history used for reformation, it involves the internal workings and structure to bring the government of the church back into alignment. It doesn't involve making Starbucks a Christian company. When you look at cultural renewal, that's what I call it, cultural renewal. It's the gardeners of God going out into the earth and transforming the wilderness back into Eden. That what you see there is you see an active presence dynamic within church history, where the people of God are loving God, they're loving people, they're hosting the presence. And then what you begin to see is you see that shalom dynamic, which is the restoration of everything, begin to be created within a region accidentally. So you look at like what happened in Wales and within church history, the transformation of cities and nations happens accidentally, not strategically. It's people loving God and loving each other, and the reformation occurs. So I think, another example is, if we're going to seek happiness, we're probably going to find a certain level of frustration and loneliness. But if we will seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, all these other things are added unto us. So that's where, if you've heard Charlie Champ or Jeremy Nelson or myself lately, this is a real hot button for us. If you listen to the podcast I've done recently with Charlie or with Jeremy, this is a real hot button for us. And the reason why is because there is a message right now where we don't need revival, we need reformation. But the problem with that is there is a temptation to try to finish something in the flesh that God has began in the spirit. And I could be wrong, but I think that young people want God. They want the realms of the kingdom. I think young people, like you say, hey, let's get together at my house and talk about how we're going to Christianize everything. Like, I don't know, but hey, just come to my house and let's just have a night of just enjoying the presence of the Lord, just organic worship, and we're just going to seek after God. I could probably pack my house out, pack the place out. And so yeah, we've now the reason why I bring all that up is because, again, if you can have a move of God without government, but it won't be sustained, and what you'll have is the move, the fruit of the move will take on the token gifting or office of that person. So, for example, and now listen, I know that nobody listening to me knows who I am right now. Your audience, you're in New Zealand, you got all these awesome New Zealanders. And so the problem with that is that, like, I could come across as like overly opinionated or dishonoring because of the level of honesty that I'm working in. But a core value for myself is that one of the highest forms of honor is honesty. And so I have nothing in my heart but honor and love and appreciation for just all the generals and moves of God that have prepared us for this time. And I just wanted to say that just as it'll go into the subconscious and hopefully help me out a little bit, because I don't want people to think that I'm just this opinionated, proud person. But
the majority of our crew will not think like that.
Okay, yeah. The reason why I wanted to say that here is because, like, first, really quick, is because, for example, you take a move of God like the Brownsville revival. If you remember, like, the whole Brownsville, Pensacola, and it was awesome. In fact, I was just listening to worship with my children from that revival yesterday with Lindell Cooley, and we went there to experience that. Okay, the office employed in that revival was Steve Hill and the office of the evangelist. So the fruit, the outflow of that was one of massive conversions, unprecedented conversions within that time and place. Yep. They were even picked up by Rolling Stone, and Steve Hill was on the cover of Rolling Stone. And they made fun of a lot of things, but you could tell that they were deeply impacted by that revival. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But what's sad about it is that you only had the employment of one office, and that was the evangelist. And you can look through moves of God where you see that, where you see one particular office that's employed, but because the other offices, because there wasn't the government, I would say it's the relational structure. It's the honoring of the offices. And it doesn't have to be the honoring of people. It has to be the honoring and the accountability that exists within the offices of, because you have many moves of God that didn't have an evangelistic office that was honored. So because of that, you didn't have any salvations. And then that immediately puts an expiration date on it.
Yeah.
Because, so that's where I feel like, when you look at the places that are still around, it's because of the honor towards the office. When you look at Bethel and you look at the transformation they've had in their own city and nation and the nations, the influence they have in the nations, it's because they are very vocal and outspoken about the honor of the five offices. And when you look at even Toronto, they're still going after it in Toronto. When you look at Cheon, the people that are still around, that are still moving in the fire, it's because they did it biblically. They went after it with saying that we're going to honor the prophets. This is going to be difficult because they're going to be saying things we don't want to hear. It's going to be a love test. We're going to honor the evangelist, and that's going to be difficult because they're going to be like, we've got to get out of here. We've got to get people saved. We're going to honor the pastors, and that's going to be difficult because they're going to be like, we are wide, but we are shallow, and we need to love people. We need to disciple people. We need to know each other. We need to honor the teacher, which says you've got a lot of presence here, but your theology is crap, and you're saying things that just don't have any mathematical sense, and this skeleton will not be healthy for our generation as we go forward. And we're going to honor the apostles so that we've got a blueprint where these offices, I think it takes an apostle to honor the fivefold. And so that's where I said geek out a little bit, because
no, man, this is so good. I want to get your thoughts on house churches. Well, I don't even want to use that term because obviously, like, okay, so let's look at a normal church, and I hope now you don't mind me going there. Like, we're going there.
A normal church.
well, I'll explain that, but I'm giving a disclaimer too now to you and whoever might hear. Like, I just want to ask some questions of how we do things. You've been part of businesses. If you run a business and you don't check what is the business bringing forth the objective it was set out to bring, and that kind of accountability, of, hey, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? So that kind of question, I don't think churches ask that question enough, right? Or the performance is, or the objective is narrowed down to just this personal expression instead of a kingdom collective understanding. And I know you get what I'm saying. So here's my question. Most churches, you will see maybe 10, 20 people carrying the load, pulling the weight, and then maybe 60 to 80, and I'm generalizing here, 60 to 80% happy to come along, and a portion of that are like, yeah, I'm in, I'm out. And then there's some that's just like, I'm just riding, that's it. Like, if this thing blows, I'm out. Like, So do you think that is actually an effective model? Is that, because when you see Jesus not building a one-stop shop, and he's like, go, and he takes these 12 men who carry everything you're saying, and they're just like, what are your thoughts on all of this? I'd love to hear them.
Okay, yeah. So if you're watching this or you're listening to this, and this is where I'll talk to listeners, which up to this point I've been talking to you, Joseph, but because I hope this is helpful. But you got people that are not in any sort of church leadership that are either done with the church or they're trying to attend a church, and there's just a great level of frustration. So if that's you, I get it. I totally get it, right? And there's frustration because you're in a church where there's awesome teaching, but there's no evangelism, right? Nobody's getting saved. You're not doing any sort of outreaches in your city. You're just equipping. And they say, I'm a part of an equipping church. And that means that your pastor isn't really a pastor. He's a teacher, but he's the pastor. He's the guy. So what do? Well, you have to pray and obey, because if God has called you there to that place, then you need to just rejoice and just enjoy the revelation, enjoy the equipping, and be accountable for your own frustration. Keep your soul under control and to pastor your soul well. Because what we don't get to do is we don't get to attend an equipping church and then try to recreate it into our image we can't, because that's when you get into Christian witchcraft. It's like, I'm called to be a prophet. I'm so prophetic. Like, I prophesied over one of our city council people at Starbucks, and I read their mail and they were weeping. Like, I'm so prophetic. My desire is to see the prophetic in every church, but my church is not prophetic. All my pastor wants to do is preach every single Sunday. Preach. And so I'm at this church to make it prophetic, and I'm going to bring a prophetic culture. Like, okay, so what you're doing is you're taking your gifting and your desire, and you're about to force it onto the culture of your church. And to the degree that you try to force that culture, you're going to find yourself subconsciously manipulating the church culture, which is actually the sin of witchcraft. So the primary form of witchcraft that we see coming against the church right now is internal and not external. And that means you've got people that are operating in rebellion, which is essentially unaccountable frustration, where they are trying to either change their pastor's values or to change the DNA of a church. I don't know if you've ever tried to change the DNA of someone, but you can't do it. Their DNA is fixed. And so if you're not in church leadership, you are not empowered to change the DNA of your church. And that's where you need to pray and obey, because you're better off leaving. You either got to dive in and serve the DNA, or you need to get out, because to the degree that you're frustrated, you're going to find yourself saying things to people in the church. You're going to find yourself being subversive against leadership. And that's a sin, and that's wrong. And so I'm not shaming you, but if you've been doing that, bro, you gotta repent, because, man, pastors are getting word cursed by by people in their own church, and people are being duped into participating with witchcraft, and most of them don't realize it. Some of them do realize it. There's a lady that has come to our church in the past, and she is a Christian witch, and she knows it, and she's partnering with ministries on purpose, because once her money flows into the ministry, there's a tether or a tie that's created, and then she uses that financial tie in order to curse those institutions.
My gosh.
I don't know if I answered your question or not, but certainly got pretty.
Well, I mean, this is a deep conversation, right? Because there is a lot of stuff. I believe that there is a shaking happening all over the world for people to check everything from leadership to the newest person. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? Does this line up? Is this what God wants? I believe that's happening whether people like it or not, But I have a question for you in terms of house churches and these going from home to home and building real community, real family. And, I had a man on who's a good friend of mine who's been instrumental in maybe the birthing of around 10 million house churches around the world. He's in the 60s. He's a theologian. He loves the Lord. And that's kind of, I guess you'd say it's his DNA. And so I just kind of want to know your thoughts on that, on real kingdom expansion, not just from a 20%, 30% people who get it, who will die, but actually a actual filtering of true disciples. Like, what are your thoughts on that? And
yeah, man, I love it, man. And Bob Jones once had a vision where in the vision he saw these barns that were overflowing, and the barns were schools, church buildings, people's homes. It was like anything that was like the ownership of a believer became like a barn. And it's because of the harvest that was coming in. There's no church building that could contain it. It's like everybody's homes became churches, and all the schools became churches, and all the churches became churches. and so I absolutely love it. And I think the biggest thing that we have to protect our hearts on is that we don't judge, is that we don't make a blanket judgment because of the size of something. Because I know some people that will judge something because it's 20 people and say it's not revival because it's not 2,000 people. I know other people that'll say it's not revival because it is 2,000 people and God doesn't work in mega churches. And so, if you think that mega churches aren't part of God's heart for a reformation for the future, you're wrong. And if you don't think that house churches are a part of what God's going to be doing, you're wrong. God's going to use whatever he wants to use. And he's going to use the big, and he's going to use the small, and he's going to use the poor, and he's going to use the rich. He's going to use the wise, and he's going to use the foolish. And that's, what I'm saying? And so we've got to be so open-hearted. We've got to be so open-minded, because if there's something that could offend you, God's going to figure out how to do it, and offense is one of those things where every move of God is going to have offense in it. Like, it's always going to offend our flesh, reveal our heart. And Jesus was so offensive. He was such an offense. Everything about his whole thing is offensive. The fact that he was born in a barn, the fact he was born to a virgin, everything about the ministry of Jesus is offensive, to the degree where they're like, this guy can't even live we've got to take this guy out. This guy is he's such a disgrace to our religion. And so if you want to be a part of what God's doing on the earth, prepare to be offended, figure out your offense strategy now. God he's always offending me. And I just love it. I never want to be intentionally offensive just to be offensive. But I know that maybe sometimes God uses me to offend people, so.
Me too. Well, I mean, I bring up this conversation because with a group of people here in Auckland, I am walking this journey out, me and my wife, and we've been meeting in a house in a small group of about 20. It's been awesome, but I can feel God releasing something now. And we are just trying to find that synergy, like you're saying, of a bigger meeting that we're doing once a month, which is more like a party, a family get together, eating, sharing testimonies, and I'm just walking this path of like what you're saying. How does this work? Because it can't be one or the other. There has to be a synergy, and it's a real interesting walk. So,
yeah, one of the things I would challenge you on in that is that everything healthy grows. So so as parents, we prepare our 5-year-olds to see them mature. So we're always getting them ready for when they're going to be 6 and 7 and 8.
Yep.
So be looking at your current culture right now and be thinking about, what does this look matured by 5 years?
Yeah.
And then start to get a vision of that now. I'm 38. I'm trying to think about, what am I going to be like when I'm 58 and 68, because that's affecting the choices that I'm making right now. So I want to live my life right now with 58 and 68 in mind. And that's gonna allow me to have a lot of wisdom now. And so the challenge for a vibrant home group, or not home group, a house church, is that you're going to grow, and that the values that you have now are going to change, and because they're going to have to change, because the government that you needed when you were 5 years old versus the government that you need when you're 25 changes. And yet you so honor where you're at right now, and you always want to have that raw and unscripted, that organic feel. So the question is going to be, how can you grow larger by getting smaller? How can you protect those values? And then also, how do you make sure that your values today don't become your defeater beliefs tomorrow? So you're giving yourself permission to grow, and to grow out of concepts and ways of thinking, knowing that the government that you have right now is right for where you're at, but knowing that that your values are going to have to change. And then also, as a community, knowing what things are so important to you that you're not willing for them to change, the things that you're willing to fight for, and the things that you're willing to die for, so that you can grow and mature, but that you don't sell out. And I think that that's where we need to do a better job in our cultures, talking about the non-negotiables, those values, those things that are truly in our DNA, that no matter how small or how big we get, our DNA won't change. So figuring out, taking the time and collectively working through that, wrestling through that, because it's not about a corporate identity. It's not about having some cool banners on your wall, or some sort of cool mission statement on a flyer. Like it's not about that. It's that having it so clear to find that if your community gets cut, you bleed the values of so that everybody knows, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm at work. This is why in our church you don't have 20% of the people or 10% of the people doing 80% of the work, 90% of the work. This is why all of our hands are to the plow, because we know who we are, and this matters to us. And so we are going to go all in to see God glorified through our community.
Bro, I love what you're saying. And I just had this idea. I would love to host a conversation with you and my friend at the same time, because I think that you could handle that, and he can handle that. It's really interesting when you have a conversation that might have some different views, how many people can't handle that, and I'll put that out after we finish here. But I would love to host that. That conversation would be so important, especially in this time where some people are just like, well, I'm done with church. I'm done with God. I'm out, or this is the only way, this is the right way. And there's truth, or well, let me say it this way, there's facts on both sides of the fence, but I guess truth is where God meets this equation, where love meets this equation, and turns into truth. And it would be amazing to have that conversation,
I would love that. Yeah, I would love that, man. And also just an opportunity for us to build our relationship and kind of get to know you and the people that you're doing life with. And then also, I think that I heard this recently from I think it was, do you know Brett Weinstein? Is that his name? Do you know him? He's a biologist.
No, I haven't heard that name.
Anyways, I think it was him that was talking about that anytime we get together and we have disagreement or different perspectives, and we can go after it, we're never going to find like full agreement entire. Through our conversation and dialogue, if there's a moment that we do find agreement where we didn't have it because of our fierce conversation, whenever you get a moment like that, you get an upgrade, and both parties upgrade in that moment. And and that's what the church has been afraid of historically. I don't agree with what they say about this. I don't agree with this. So then we build our walls, and we get out our firearms, and I got to protect the church, right? I got to protect, and we protect by assassinating other ministries or ministers. That's what we call protection. Versus, I don't have to be intimidated by your beliefs, and your beliefs are not going to kill the bride of Christ. You're not that big. No, the bride has a groom. So if we can have an honest, honorable conversation, let's go after it, and maybe there'll be something that we can come into agreement on that we didn't have agreement before, and then we level up. And I think that's what I need. I think that's what the church needs. And so, and really, man, you can't do that on Sunday morning. You can't do that on Wednesday night. That's why we need a new platform. And that's where I think podcasts are the new platform where there can be unity where there hasn't been unity before, and there can be agreement where there hasn't been agreement, and there can be upgrades that couldn't be possible in a traditional church forum.
I love it. I had a conversation on the end times, and I got two. There was a dispensationalist view, and then there was like a preterist view, and we just talked it out, and it was awesome. I got some people hating me for doing that, but it was such a good conversation. And so what you're saying, man, I think it's very needed. I love it. And love. I always say this: love is not a need; it's a choice. And at some point, two humans will have to choose each other. The body has to choose each other, and I don't think we've like unity to me can only come when I know I have the freedom not to choose you, but yet I choose you. Unity. It's not I don't have to. I'm not bound to you, but I'm choosing you. And I think that starts to facilitate such a breeding ground for everything God wants to do, despite disagreement, or So
that's good, man.
I love what you're saying, man. So.
Well, Joseph, I appreciate you and your heart for the people of God, and for sons and daughters that don't even know they're sons and daughters yet. And you and I had an opportunity to talk a little bit off the air, and there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of similar values that resonate, even if we don't have language for it yet. And so I appreciate what you're doing, and in any way that I can serve you and these dreams and desires of your heart in your beautiful country, let me know. And and I would look forward to future conversations with you and your buddies.
Man, thank you so much for being here, bro. Like, we've gone maybe 100 minutes. That's over an hour and a half, and that went quick. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I know there are going to be many more, and this might be a different style here happening, where it's not just a normal interview, but there's discussion here, and that might be what's happening here. So Darren, I just want to honor you again for carrying the unique anointing. I know I heard Patricia King say that to you, but it is unique, especially because you came up through the church. And I just want to honor you for what you're doing, and for the next generation that you're about to father. I just honor you, bro, and I'm so thankful for this connection, and I look forward to more chats.
Awesome. And hey, next time you'll talk more, and I'll
No, man, that was awesome. So guys, hope you enjoyed that. Have a great day, great morning, great evening, wherever you are. For now, Darren, you can stay with me just for a couple of minutes, but everyone else, we're going to say goodbye. We love you guys. We'll talk soon.